My son had a fever, but my mother-in-law declared he was faking it. We'll cure him right now, she hissed. And right in front of my spineless husband, she poured a basin of ice-cold water over our child. My son screamed from the cold and shock. I snapped. First, my fist flew into her face, and then I sent that jellyfish of a husband tumbling down the stairs. Before we begin this story, please subscribe and hit the like button. It's very important to me. It will help me create even more stories like this one. And now, enjoy the story. The sharp beep of the digital thermometer pierced the silence of the room. Sarah flinched and reached for the nightstand, where the small white device lay on a saucer next to a glass of water. 101.7 degrees Fahrenheit. The numbers on the display glowed an ominous red, confirming her worst fears. She gently touched 5-year-old Leo's forehead. It was hot and dry. Her son tossed and turned restlessly in his sleep. His cheeks were flushed with an unhealthy blush, and his blonde hair, usually a cheerful, spiky mess, was matted to his sweaty skin. "Shh, my sweet boy. Shh," Sarah whispered, adjusting the tangled blanket. She had been sitting by his bedside for 3 hours, ever since he woke up, coughing and complaining of chills. The night was slowly receding. Outside their Cleveland, Ohio apartment window, a gloomy November dawn was breaking. Her husband, Derek, was sleeping peacefully on the sofa in the living room. Just last night, when Sarah told him Leo's temperature was rising, he had brushed it off. "Oh, come on. He just caught a bug at daycare. Give him some ginger ale and he'll be fine. No need to panic." For him, it was always panic. Any anxiety she felt, any concern for their son's health, he perceived as over-the-top fussiness and hypochondria. Derek himself, it seemed, was made of steel. In their 4 years of marriage, she couldn't remember him being sick with anything more serious than a sniffle. He generally approached many things in life with a light, almost philosophical indifference, especially things that required effort. Sarah stood up quietly and went to the kitchen. She needed to prepare some fever-reducing syrup. As a pharmacy technician, she knew that a temperature this high needed to be brought down, especially in a child. As she poured the thick pink liquid into a measuring spoon, she thought about how she would have to call in to work again. Her manager at the pharmacy, a strict but fair woman, would understand, of course. Taking a sick day to care for a child was a sacred right, but Sarah felt awkward. She had only recently returned from maternity leave and was trying to prove herself as a responsible employee. She gently woke Leo. "Honey, you need to take your medicine." The boy sleepily opened his eyes, frowned crankily, but obediently swallowed the syrup. "Now try to get some more sleep," Sarah whispered, kissing his hot forehead. Returning to the kitchen, she put the kettle on and sat at the table, holding her head in her hands. It was going to be a long day. A sick child required constant attention, and she still had to cook, clean, go to the grocery store all on her own. Derek would probably sleep until noon, then sit down at his laptop, feigning a flurry of activity. He called himself a freelancer, writing articles for some obscure websites, but it brought in almost no money. The main financial burden fell on her modest pharmacy tech salary. They lived in her apartment, which she had inherited from her grandmother. It was a cozy 2-bedroom in an older building that Sarah had turned into a comfortable nest with her own 2 hands. She had painted the walls, chosen the furniture, and hung the pictures. Derek had barely participated in the renovations, saying that physical labor wasn't his forte. His fortes were ideas and projects. For 2 years now, he had been in a state of creative search, promising that he was on the verge of launching a brilliant startup that would make them rich. At first, Sarah believed him. Then she hoped. And now, she was just tired. The phone on the table vibrated. Her mother-in-law, Dolores. Sarah tensed up inside. A call at 7 a.m. did not bode well. "Hello, Sarah, dear. So good to hear your voice." Her mother-in-law's tone was, as always, syrupy sweet but with a metallic edge. "I didn't wake you, did I?" "No, Dolores. We're already up." Leo's not feeling well. Not feeling well? Unconcealed doubt echoed in Dolores's voice. What is it this time? Another one of your exaggerations. You always make a mountain out of a molehill, Sarah gritted her teeth. He has a fever of 101.7. Big deal, her mother-in-law scoffed. A common cold. In my day, children went to school with a fever like that. You modern mothers just coddle your kids like they're made of glass. How's Derek? He didn't catch it from him, did he? Derek's fine. He's sleeping. Oh, thank goodness. Dolores sighed with relief. His health must be protected. He's a man with a delicate constitution. He can't be stressed, but that Leo of yours, there's always something wrong with him. First a runny nose, then a cough. He didn't get our Henderson family genes. We Hendersons are all strong as oxen. Sarah remained silent. Arguing with Dolores was like banging her head against a brick wall. As a retired registered nurse, she considered herself the ultimate authority on all medical matters, and her treatment methods were stuck somewhere in the mid-20th century. All right, she changed her tone. The reason I'm calling is, I've decided to come over today to help. I can see you can't handle it alone. I'll bring Derek his favorite pot roast and take a look at your sick one. I'll teach you a thing or two about how to properly care for a child. Sarah's heart sank. A visit from her mother-in-law. It was worse than any illness. It meant total control, endless lectures, and venomous comments about everything she did. There's no need. Dolores will manage, she tried to object. It's not up for discussion. Her mother-in-law snapped. My son is hungry. My grandson is sick. And she says she'll manage. Expect me by lunch. The line went dead with a series of short beeps. Sarah put the phone down and covered her face with her hands. Why, oh why? Did it have to be today? She went into the living room. Derek was stretching luxuriously on the sofa. Who was that calling so early? He asked sleepily. Your mother. She said she's coming over to help. Oh, great, Derek beamed. Moms are the best. She'll bring her pot roast and watch Leo for a bit. You look completely worn out. He was utterly oblivious to her crestfallen state. For him, his mother's visit was a celebration. For Sarah, it was the beginning of a natural disaster. She said nothing, just silently left the room. By lunchtime, she had managed to tidy up the apartment, make a light chicken soup for Leo, and run to the pharmacy for more medicine. Her son's temperature had dropped to 99.5 degrees Fahrenheit. He had eaten a little and was now quietly playing with his building blocks in his room. Sarah felt a small sense of relief. Maybe everything would be okay after all. At exactly 2 p.m., an imperious ring echoed from the doorbell. Sarah went to open it. On the threshold stood Dolores Henderson. Tall, heavyset, with perfectly coiffed gray hair and pursed lips. In her hands, she held a large casserole dish from which emanated the mouth-watering aroma of roasted meat. Well, look at you, Mother of the Year, she said instead of a greeting, striding into the apartment and sizing Sarah up with a critical eye. You look terrible. You've really let yourself go. She proceeded to the kitchen, set the dish on the table, and immediately began her inspection. She peered into the refrigerator, ran a finger along the countertop, and critically examined the stove. Where's the patient? She asked, finding nothing to complain about. He's playing in his room, Sarah replied. Playing? Dolores raised her eyebrows in surprise. And you said he had a fever of nearly 104. They're all little actors, these children. They get sick on purpose to get attention. Well, let's go have a look at this drama king. She headed for the children's room. Sarah followed, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. This visit would not end well. She knew it for a fact. Dolores entered the children's room like an icebreaker carving a path through Arctic ice. She stopped at the threshold, crossing her arms over her chest and giving her grandson a stern, almost hostile look. Leo was sitting on the carpet, concentrating on building a tower of colorful blocks. Seeing his grandmother, he smiled. Grandma, hi. Hello, Leo, Dolores responded dryly. Her gaze flickered over his flushed cheeks and shiny eyes, then shot back to Sarah. And this is what you call a sick child? He looks healthier than all of us combined. He had a high fever last night, Sarah said quietly. I gave him a fever reducer. He's a little better now. A fever reducer? Dolores threw up her hands as if Sarah had just confessed to a terrible crime. Why poison the child with all those chemicals? The body needs to fight it off on its own. That's how immunity is built. She approached Leo and unceremoniously placed her wide, cold palm on his forehead. There's no fever. He's warm, yes. But that's because it's as stuffy as a sauna in this room. You need to air it out immediately. Without waiting for a reply, she marched decisively to the window and threw it wide open. A gust of icy November wind burst into the room. The curtains rustled. A child's drawing fell from the windowsill. Leo shivered and shrank back. Dolores, what are you doing? Sarah rushed to close the window. You can't do that so suddenly. He just got over a fever. Don't tell me how to do my job, the mother-in-law snapped, blocking her path. A draft is the best medicine for all illnesses. Let him breathe some fresh air, or he'll completely wither away in your little sweatbox. At that moment, Derek entered the room, drawn by the noise. Oh, Mom, you're here! He hugged her happily. What are you two arguing about? I'm just trying to teach your wife some basic things, Dolores complained. She's bundled up the child, closed all the windows, and turned the nursery into a breeding ground for germs. And I'm saying, you need to air it out. Mom's right. Derek agreed instantly, without even grasping the situation. Fresh air is healthy. Sarah looked helplessly at her husband. He stood there, smiling beside his mother, and together they looked like an invincible force, a united front against which she had no chance. Fine. She gave in. But just for a few minutes, literally 5. She went to Leo and wrapped him in a warm blanket. The boy clung to her, and she could feel him trembling slightly. While the room was airing out, Dolores continued her inspection. She looked into the closet with the children's clothes, criticizing how they were folded. Then she checked the medicine cabinet and, to her horror, found the potent medication prescribed by the pediatrician. What is this? She waved a box of antibiotics in the air. You were going to give this to a child? For a common cold? Do you have any idea that antibiotics destroy all the good bacteria? The doctor said if the fever doesn't break in 3 days, we should start the course. Sarah tried to explain. Leo is at risk for complications with his ears. Doctors! Her mother-in-law scoffed contemptuously. They prescribe antibiotics for everything these days. They have quotas to meet, and then the children suffer from digestive problems. No. We will treat him with proven, natural methods. She decisively took the box and hid it in the pocket of her sweater. Sarah wanted to object, but Derek shot her a warning look. Don't argue with Mom, his eyes said. When the airing out was over and Sarah finally closed the window, she took Leo's temperature again, 100.2 degrees Fahrenheit. The fever was returning. See? Dolores declared triumphantly. And you were so scared. The fresh air did him good. And now for the procedures. She pulled some dried herbs, a jar of honey, and a bag of lemons from her enormous purse. We'll have him inhale steam from a boiling pot, then we'll rub his chest with Vicks VapoRub. And at night, hot milk with honey and baking soda. No more pills. He'll be right as rain by morning. Sarah was horrified. Steam inhalation was contraindicated for high fevers. The strong menthol rub could cause an allergic reaction, and honey was a major irritant for a sore throat. Dolores, I don't think that's a good idea, she began cautiously. The pediatrician recommended plenty of warm fluids and rest. Your pediatrician doesn't know everything, her mother-in-law retorted. My own grandmother treated me this way, and she lived to be 90. You people with your newfangled methods are just harming your children. Mom, maybe not the steam? Derek interjected uncertainly. I remember getting burned by it when I was a kid. That's because you were fidgeting. His mother looked at him sternly. But Leo is a good boy. He'll sit still. Right, grandson? Leo, hearing his name, just clung tighter to Sarah. He looked with fear at the formidable grandmother and her mysterious preparations. Sarah realized that arguing was useless. She decided to try a different tactic. "All right," she said. "Let's try your methods. But first, we need to have lunch. Leo is probably hungry." She hoped that over lunch she could distract her mother-in-law. And then, when she settled down to watch her afternoon soap opera, she could give her son his medicine unnoticed. Lunch was the chicken soup. Dolores ate it with a demonstrative grimace. "Water?" she delivered her verdict. "Just water. How can you feed a man with this?" "Derek, honey, I brought you pot roast. Now that's real food." She took the casserole from its carrier and placed the plate right in front of Derek. He immediately lunged at it greedily. "Mom, this is divine. As always," he said with his mouth full. "Sarah, you have to try some." "Thanks. I'm not hungry," Sarah replied, trying to feed Leo some soup. The boy was fussy and refused to eat. "See?" her mother-in-law interjected immediately. "The child himself knows your food is tasteless. Not like mine." She broke off a piece of the rich meat and held it out to Leo. "Here, grandson, try it. Grandma's pot roast. He can't have fried, heavy food." Sarah stopped her. "He has a sore throat. One little piece won't hurt," her mother-in-law protested. "You're always forbidding everything." She still managed to shove a piece of the pot roast into Leo's mouth. The boy started coughing. And then, he immediately threw up right on the table. "Are you happy now?" Sarah shouted, scooping her son into her arms and carrying him to the bathroom. When she returned, having cleaned and changed Leo, the kitchen was empty. Derek and his mother had retreated to the living room, leaving her alone to clean up the consequences of their care. Sarah cleaned the table and washed the floor. Her hands were shaking with suppressed rage. She put Leo to bed and gave him some warm juice. He fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted by his illness and the stress. Sarah quietly closed the door to the nursery and went into the living room. Dolores was sitting on the sofa watching TV. Derek was sitting next to her, scrolling through something on his phone. They pretended not to notice her. "We need to talk," Sarah said firmly, standing in front of them. Neither of them looked up from their activities. "I am asking you, Dolores, not to interfere with my son's treatment," she said, looking her mother-in-law straight in the eye. "I am his mother, and I will do what I think is necessary and what the doctor recommends." "Oh, so that's how you're talking now?" The mother-in-law slowly rose, her face contorting with anger. "You're going to tell me, a person with a medical background, what to do? Who do you think you are? A little pharmacy tech from some rundown CVS, a pill pusher." "I am his mother," Sarah repeated, "and I am responsible for his life and health. And your methods, excuse me, are barbaric." "Derek, do you hear how she's talking to me?" the mother-in-law shrieked, turning to her son. "She is insulting me in your home." Derek stood up. He was a head taller than Sarah, and now he was looking down on her. "Sarah, stop it," he said in an icy tone. "You're being irrational. Mom came to help. And you're making a scene. Help?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "She almost choked our son with her pot roast." "It was an accident," he snapped. "Don't exaggerate. Apologize to my mother." Immediately, Sarah looked at him, and tears welled up in her eyes, tears of hurt and disappointment. He hadn't even tried to understand her. He had once again, as always, chosen his mother. "No," she said firmly, "I will not apologize. If you don't stop your experiments on my child, I will call the police." It was a desperate threat, but it worked. Dolores gasped and clutched her heart. Derek was taken aback. "Are you crazy? What police?" "The regular kind." Sarah felt the fear recede, replaced by a cold resolve. "And I will file a report for child endangerment." She turned and walked back to the nursery, closing the door firmly behind her. She sat by the bedside of her sleeping son and listened. From the living room came the indignant whispers of her mother-in-law and the confused mumbling of her husband. She knew she had just crossed a line. She had declared war on them, and she didn't know how it would end. But she knew one thing. She would fight for her son to the very end. The calm after the storm was brief and deceptive. Sarah sat in the nursery for almost an hour, listening as the voices outside the door died down. She hoped her threat had worked, that they would leave her and Leo in peace. But she was mistaken. When she quietly opened the door to go to the kitchen for water, she saw her husband and mother-in-law sitting at the table, conferring in low voices. They fell silent when they saw her. Dolores's face was a mask of undisguised hatred. Derek looked at her with reproach, as if she were a traitor. "We've decided," he began in a formal tone, "that you need to rest. You're too stressed and overworked. Mom and I will take care of Leo ourselves." "What do you mean, yourselves?" Sarah didn't understand. "Exactly what it means," her mother-in-law interjected. "You will go and lie down in your room, and we will treat the child our way." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying with my son." "Sarah!" "Don't be stubborn," Derek said, and a threatening note entered his voice. "We've made up our minds. It's for the best, especially for Leo. He doesn't need a hysterical mother." He stood up and walked toward her, apparently intending to forcibly take her to the bedroom. "Don't touch me!" Sarah cried, backing away. "I am not leaving my child!" She ran back to the nursery and tried to lock the door, but Derek was faster. He stuck his foot in the gap, preventing the door from closing, and then yanked it open. "Enough with the theatrics," he hissed, grabbing her by the arm. His fingers squeezed like a vice. "Let go. You're hurting me. You're going to the bedroom. And you're going to stay there until you calm down." He dragged her down the hallway. Dolores followed with a triumphant smirk on her face. "Derek, be gentle with her," she cooed insincerely. A nervous breakdown. They pushed her into the bedroom and closed the door. Sarah heard the key turn in the lock. They had locked her in. She threw herself at the door, rattling the handle, pounding with her fists. "Let me out! You have no right! I'll call the police!" "Go ahead and call," came her mother-in-law's mocking voice from behind the door. "Your phone is with your husband. We'll see how you manage that." Sarah looked around in desperation. Her cell phone was indeed on the kitchen table. They hadn't had a landline in years. She was trapped. She ran to the window. 3rd floor. Jumping was madness. Screaming? Who would hear her in the middle of the day? Everyone was at work. She rushed back to the door. "Derek, open up, please. What are you going to do to Leo?" "Treat him!" her mother-in-law shouted back. "The right way, not the way your quack doctors prescribed." Sarah heard Leo start to cry. He had woken up. "Mommy," he called. "Mommy, where are you?" "I'm here, sweetie. I'll be there soon," Sarah shouted, tears streaming down her face. She heard her mother-in-law enter the nursery, heard her start saying something in her icy, commanding tone. Leo's crying grew louder. Sarah paced the room like a caged animal, not knowing what to do. She tried to shoulder the door open, but the old, solid door wouldn't budge. She looked for something heavy in the room, something to break the lock with, but there was nothing suitable. Time stretched on agonizingly. Her son's crying would subside, then resume with new force. Sarah sat on the floor, her ear pressed against the door, going mad with helplessness and fear. A couple of hours must have passed. The apartment fell quiet, too quiet. Sarah strained her ears. No crying, no voices. What was happening out there? She started banging on the door again. "Derek! Dolores! What's wrong with Leo? Why is he quiet?" Silence. Panic washed over her in an icy wave. She jumped up and started pacing again. And then her eyes fell on the storage space above the door. Up near the ceiling, all sorts of junk was stored. Old boxes, Christmas ornaments, tools. She dragged a chair to the door and climbed onto it. Her hands were shaking so much she could barely keep her balance. She fumbled on the dusty shelf and her fingers closed around a heavy metal hammer. Getting down, she took several deep breaths, trying to calm herself. Then, gathering all her strength, she began to hit the lock with the hammer. The blows were weak and inaccurate, but she kept going, again and again, ignoring the pain in her bruised fingers. Finally, after a dozen blows, something crunched. The lock gave way. Sarah threw her shoulder against the door, and it swung open. She ran into the hallway. The nursery was empty. Leo's crib was empty. "Leo!" she screamed, her voice breaking. She ran into the living room. On the sofa, covered with a blanket, slept Derek. An empty bottle of brandy and the leftover pot roast sat on the coffee table in front of him. And the mother-in-law? Where was her son? Sarah ran to her sleeping husband and started shaking him by the shoulders. "Derek, wake up! Where is Leo?" He mumbled something unintelligibly and turned away. In desperation, Sarah looked around and saw her mother-in-law's purse on a chair. She rushed to it, rummaging through its contents, and there, at the bottom, among tissues and pills, she found what she was looking for: a phone. She ran to the kitchen and dialed 911. "Hello, 911, my child. He had a high fever. He's missing." Her voice was breaking. She couldn't properly explain what had happened, and then she heard the sound of the front door opening. Dolores walked in. Alone. "Where is my son?" Sarah rushed at her, grabbing the collar of her sweater. "Calm down, you hysteric." The mother-in-law disdainfully pushed her away. "Your son is sleeping. In our bedroom." Sarah ran to her own bedroom, the one she had left that morning. Leo was indeed lying on her bed. He was pale, breathing heavily, with a rattling sound. His clothes were soaking wet. "What did you do to him?" Sarah turned to her mother-in-law, who was standing in the doorway. "Nothing special," she smirked. "Just a little rub down with rubbing alcohol, like you're supposed to, and then a cold water compress. The surest way to bring down a fever." Sarah ran to her son, touched his forehead. It was ice cold, but his body under the wet pajamas was burning up. She grabbed the thermometer. 103.8 degrees Fahrenheit. "Are you insane?" she screamed. "That can cause a vascular spasm. You were a nurse. You should know that." "Nonsense," her mother-in-law waved her hand. "I always did it this way. I treated Derek like this too. And look, he grew up just fine." At that moment, a staggering, newly awakened Derek walked into the room. "What's all the shouting? Your mother almost killed our son." Sarah pointed at Leo. "Look what she did to him." Derek looked at the wet, wheezing child, then at his mother. "Mom, maybe this wasn't a good idea?" he asked uncertainly. "It was a fine idea," Dolores snapped. "Don't listen to her, son. She knows nothing about medicine." The front door burst open, and two paramedics with a stretcher and a doctor, a young woman in uniform, entered the apartment. "Who called 911? What's the situation?" "I did." Sarah rushed to her. "My child has a fever of almost 104. They rubbed him with alcohol and cold water. He's wheezing." The doctor quickly went to Leo, began to examine him. Listen to his breathing. "Okay, we need to get him to the hospital. Now," she commanded the paramedics. "Possible febrile seizures and early signs of pulmonary edema." She turned to Dolores. "Were you the one who treated him like this?" I was just trying to help," she stammered. "You nearly killed this child." The doctor's voice rang with steel. "Using such barbaric methods in the 21st century, I will be forced to report this to Child Protective Services." Dolores turned pale and sank onto a chair. Derek stood frozen, unable to utter a word. The paramedics carefully transferred Leo to the stretcher. "Ma'am, you'll ride with us," the doctor said to Sarah. Sarah nodded. She threw on the first coat she could find and followed the paramedics. At the door, she turned and looked at her husband and mother-in-law, two petrified statues, frozen in the horror of what they had done. "I won't let this go," she said quietly but clearly. "You will answer for this, and she walked out, slamming the door behind her. The door to her past life. The ambulance sped through the night streets, its siren wailing as it cut through the darkness. Sarah sat next to the stretcher, holding Leo's small, limp hand. She wasn't crying. The tears had dried up, leaving behind only an icy, soul-searing feeling of guilt and rage. Guilt for not being able to protect her child. Rage at those who had brought him to this state. The paramedic, a young woman named Anna, was speaking quickly into her radio, listing symptoms and requesting a pediatric ICU to be prepped. Then she turned to Sarah. "Don't worry," she said gently but firmly. "We'll do everything we can. The important thing is that you called us when you did." Another half hour, an hour, and the consequences could have been irreversible. "It's my fault," Sarah whispered. "I should have, I don't know, broken down the door sooner." "You are not to blame." Anna shook her head. "The ones who are to blame are those who put a child in this condition. Your mother-in-law is a medical professional, you said. A retired RN? All the worse for her," the paramedic said grimly. "She couldn't have been unaware of the risk of peripheral vascular spasm from such rapid cooling. It's basic medical knowledge." At the hospital, a team was already waiting for them. Leo was immediately whisked away to the pediatric intensive care unit. Sarah was asked to wait in the hallway. She sank onto a hard plastic chair and covered her face with her hands. Time stood still. She sat in that echoing, antiseptic-smelling corridor, and every second felt like an eternity. She prayed to every god she had never believed in, just for her little boy to survive. An hour later, a doctor emerged from the ICU. An elderly, gray-haired man with tired but kind eyes. "His condition is serious, but stable," he said, sitting down next to her. "We've brought the fever down. We managed to avert the seizures, but there are signs of developing edema in the lungs. We are doing everything necessary. He will spend the next 24 hours here under observation. Is he going to live?" Was all Sarah could manage to ask. "He will," the doctor said firmly. "He's young. His body will fight. But you, Mom, will need to have a serious talk with your relatives later. These kinds of treatments are not just ignorance. They're a crime." He left, and Sarah remained seated, trying to process his words. A crime. Yes, that's exactly what it was. They had committed a crime against her son. She took the phone she had managed to grab from her pocket. Her hands were trembling, but she found Megan's number in her contacts. It was late, almost midnight, but she knew her friend would be awake. "Megan," her voice broke. "Leo's in the ICU." "What?" A frightened gasp came from the other end of the line. "What? ICU? What happened?" Haltingly, interrupted by sobs, Sarah told her everything that had happened that terrible day. "I'm on my way," Megan said without hesitation. "Which hospital are you at?" "Give me the address." 40 minutes later, her friend was by her side. She had brought a thermos of hot tea and a bag of sandwiches. "Here, drink this," she ordered, handing Sarah a cup. "And eat, you need your strength." Sarah obediently took a sip. The hot, sweet liquid brought her back to her senses a little. "What do I do, Megan?" she asked, looking at her friend with eyes full of despair. "I don't know how to go on." "You fight," Megan said firmly. "You have to fight for yourself and for Leo." She sat down next to her, putting an arm around her shoulders. "Listen to me very carefully, Sarah. What they did is not just a family squabble. It's criminal. You have to file a police report." "The police?" Sarah was scared. "But, Derek, he's my husband. Leo's father." "And what?" Megan looked her straight in the eye. "Does that give him the right to harm his own child? And his mother?" She was an RN. She knew exactly what she was doing. "But they'll say I made it all up, that I'm just a hysterical woman." "And we have proof," Megan argued heatedly. "We have the paramedics' report, the ICU doctor's testimony, and we have Leo himself, who almost died because of their treatment." She took Sarah's hands. "Sarah, understand this. If you let this go now, they will never stop. They will think they can get away with anything. Today, they almost killed Leo. What about tomorrow? They'll take him away from you, just like they planned. Sarah flinched, remembering the overheard conversation. How do you know that? You told me yourself. You just forgot in all this nightmare. Megan spoke quickly, convincingly. They want to prove you're an unfit mother so they can take the apartment from you. That's their goal. And they will stop at nothing to achieve it. Sarah looked at her friend, and slowly, everything started to fall into place in her mind. Yes, Megan was right. This wasn't just an isolated incident. It was part of their plan. A cruel, cynical plan. What should I do? She asked. Right now, nothing. Megan shook her head. Right now, what matters is Leo. We'll stay here until the doctors say the crisis is over. And in the morning, we're going to the police station. And I'm going with you. I'll be your witness. They sat in the hospital corridor all night. A few times, the doctor came out to report that Leo's condition was stable, with positive progress. By morning, he was moved to a regular pediatric ward. Sarah was allowed to see him. He was lying in a large hospital bed. Small, pale, tangled in wires and IV tubes, but he was breathing evenly, calmly. When he saw his mother, he managed a weak smile. Mommy. Sarah knelt by his bed, took his hand, and pressed her cheek against it. I'm here, my love. I will always be with you. She stayed with him for about an hour, until a nurse came and said he needed to rest. When she walked out into the corridor, she saw Megan talking on the phone. Yes, I understand. Thank you. She hung up and turned to Sarah. I was talking to a friend of mine. He's an attorney. He said we have a very strong case. The main thing is to do everything by the book. He's willing to take our case. Our case? Of course, our case. Megan nodded. Did you think I'd leave you to go through this alone? They left the hospital. The morning sun was blinding after the sleepless night. Let's go, Megan said, opening her car door. Where to? To my place first. You need to take a shower, change, and get at least a little sleep. And then, to the police. At the station, a young detective met them. He listened attentively to Sarah's story. Asking clarifying questions, Megan sat beside her, occasionally interjecting legal terms that made the detective look at her with respect. I'm taking your statement, he said when Sarah had finished. We will begin an investigation immediately. Can you give me the address where your husband and mother-in-law are currently located? Sarah gave him the address of her apartment. Good. An officer will be dispatched there shortly for questioning. He looked at Sarah. You may need counseling. It's a standard procedure in cases like this. What I need is justice, Sarah said firmly. When they left the police station, she felt a strange sense of relief. She had taken the first step, the hardest one. There was no turning back now. She knew that interrogations, confrontations, and a court case awaited her. That Derek and his mother would lie, squirm, and try to paint her as the villain. But she was no longer afraid. She had her loyal friend, an experienced attorney. And most importantly, the truth on her side. And the truth was worth fighting for. Returning to Megan's apartment, Sarah felt her last ounces of strength leave her. The adrenaline that had kept her going for the past 24 hours receded, leaving behind a ringing emptiness and a leaden exhaustion. You need to sleep, Megan said, brewing strong tea. I'll call the hospital in a couple of hours to check on Leo. You go lie down. Sarah didn't argue. She went to the guest room, which her friend had thoughtfully prepared, and collapsed onto the bed. Sleep came instantly, heavy and dreamless. She woke up to Megan gently shaking her shoulder. Sarah, wake up. I called the hospital. Leo's doing great. His condition is stable, and he even asked for food. Sarah sat up, trying to process what she'd heard. Leo had asked for food. That was a good sign. Also, Megan hesitated. The detective called. Sarah tensed. What did he say? They went to your apartment. They questioned your husband and mother-in-law. They're denying everything, Megan sighed. They're saying you were the one who had a hysterical fit. That the child just had a simple cold. And you invented this whole story about the ice water to slander them. I knew it. Sarah lowered her head. They'll never admit it. It's not that simple, Megan continued. The detective said their stories were very inconsistent. First, your husband said you weren't home when they were treating Leo. Then your mother-in-law said you were there but approved of their methods. In short, they're lying. And they're not even good at it. Is that enough? They'll believe them. Not me. No, Megan shook her head. Because there's something else. The detective questioned your neighbors. And the lady downstairs, Mrs. Gable, you remember her? Sarah nodded. An elderly but feisty woman who knew everything about everyone in their building. Well, she heard Leo screaming. Loud, desperate screams. She was even going to come up, but then everything went quiet. And she confirmed the screaming happened exactly during the time frame you mentioned. A faint smile appeared on Sarah's face. Mrs. Gable. Wow. So their story about the child sleeping peacefully is falling apart. Megan squeezed her hand reassuringly. The attorney said that's very powerful testimony. They went to the hospital. Sarah was allowed to see Leo. He was sitting up in bed, eating a bowl of oatmeal with gusto. When he saw his mother, he beamed. Mommy, you came! The nice doctor gave me yummy oatmeal. Sarah hugged him, inhaling his familiar scent. He was warm, alive, her boy. How are you feeling, sweetie? Good. My throat's a little sore, and I'm sleepy. She sat with him until evening, reading him stories and drawing pictures. The doctors said the worst was over. He would have to spend another week or two in the hospital under observation, but his life was no longer in danger. When she left the ward, a surprise was waiting for her in the hallway. Standing by the window were Derek and Dolores. Sarah froze. What are you doing here? She asked coldly. We came to visit our son, Derek said. There wasn't a hint of remorse in his voice, only poorly concealed anger. Our grandson, his mother corrected him. You won't be allowed to see him, Sarah snapped. And I forbid you from ever coming near him again. You have no right, her mother-in-law flared up. We're his family. You almost took his life, Sarah shouted. Patients in the hallway began to look over with curiosity. Keep your voice down, Derek hissed, grabbing her elbow. Don't make a scene. Sarah yanked her arm away. Don't touch me. Leave, or I'll call security. Go ahead, he sneered, and we'll tell everyone what a crazy person you really are, making up stories about your own family. Derek, let's go. Dolores pulled her son's sleeve. Don't bother with her. Let her rage. We'll see who wins in the end. They left. Shooting Sarah looks full of hatred. Sarah stood in the middle of the hallway, her knees trembling. She knew this was only the beginning. They would not back down. The next few days turned into all-out war. Derek and his mother launched a full-blown campaign against her. They called her parents, telling them that Sarah had lost her mind, that she had abandoned her sick child and run away from home. Her father, a man of old-school integrity, didn't believe a word of it. But her mother grew worried and started calling Sarah, begging her to come to her senses and not destroy her family. Then they started working on their mutual acquaintances. Sarah learned from friends that Derek was telling everyone she had joined some kind of cult, that she was under someone else's influence, a clear jab at Megan, and that he was very concerned about her mental health. The lowest blow was their visit to her workplace. They came to the pharmacy during the busiest time of the day. Dolores, leaning on her son's arm, limped and moaned dramatically. Sarah, honey, come home. She began right at the entrance, in front of stunned customers and colleagues. Forgive us if we offended you in any way, but you can't do this. The child is sick. Your husband is suffering. Sarah stood behind the counter, white as a sheet. Please leave, she said quietly. We're not leaving until you come with us, Derek added. Sarah, I love you. The pharmacy manager, seeing things were getting ugly, came out of her office. "Excuse me, what's going on here? If you don't stop this spectacle, I will call the police. We just want to take our wife and daughter-in-law home," Derek declared with a tragic expression. "She's not herself." "I am perfectly fine," Sarah said firmly, stepping out from behind the counter. "But you two seem to have forgotten that there is a criminal investigation against you, and your presence here constitutes direct witness intimidation." Those words hit their mark. Derek and his mother exchanged glances. "We'll talk later," he muttered, and taking his mother by the arm, he quickly left the pharmacy. That evening, when Sarah got back to Megan's, she was in total despair. "They won't stop," she said. "They'll do anything to make me look insane." "And we'll do everything to prove their guilt," Megan replied. "The attorney is filing a motion tomorrow for a psychological evaluation." "For who? Me?" Sarah was horrified. "For them," Megan smirked. "We'll see who's really not in their right mind." But it never got to an evaluation. A day later, Sarah was called in by the detective for a formal interview with the other parties present. She entered the small office. Derek and Dolores were sitting at the table. Next to them was their lawyer, a slick man with shifty eyes. Sarah sat opposite them. Her attorney, Peter, sent by Megan, sat beside her, a calm, confident man in his middle years. The detective began asking questions. Derek and his mother answered in unison, as if rehearsed. Yes, the child was sick. Yes, they treated him. No, there was no ice water. It was all Sarah's invention. Yes, they had argued, because Sarah was on edge and behaving irrationally. Sarah listened to their lies and rage boiled inside her. "That's not true!" She couldn't help but exclaim. "You're lying!" "Mrs. Sokolov, please maintain order," the detective said sternly. And then, Sarah's attorney placed a small digital recorder on the table. "Detective," he said, "I would like to submit this audio recording as evidence. It contains a conversation between my client's husband and mother-in-law, where they discuss how best to treat the child to make him seem sicker, and how to prove that my client is an unfit mother." Silence fell in the room. Derek's face fell. Dolores gripped the arms of her chair. That's illegal," their lawyer stammered. "You had no right to record them." "We did," Sarah's attorney replied calmly. "The recording was made for the purpose of self-defense and to protect the interests of a minor child. Ohio is a one-party consent state." The detective took the recorder. "We will have the authenticity of this recording verified. In the meantime," he looked at Derek, "I would recommend, Mr. Henderson, that you start telling the truth. It will be better for everyone." Derek looked at his mother, then at Sarah, then at his lawyer, and suddenly, he buried his face in his hands. "It was all her!" he sobbed, pointing a finger at his mother. "It was her idea. I didn't want to. I told her we shouldn't. But she said it would be for the best. She said we would take the apartment from Sarah and all live together." Dolores jumped up, knocking over her chair. "You traitor! You ungrateful whelp! I did everything for you, and you—" "Silence!" the detective barked. The meeting devolved into a farce. Mother and son screamed at each other, accusing one another of every sin imaginable. The lawyers tried to calm them down, while Sarah just sat and silently watched the circus. She felt no satisfaction, no pleasure, only an immense exhaustion and emptiness. There they were, her closest family, pathetic and dishonest, ready to drown each other just to save their own skins. She stood up. "May I go?" she asked the detective. "Yes," he nodded, looking at the Hendersons with disgust. "We'll call you if we need you." Sarah walked out of the office without looking back. Behind her, she could still hear the shouts and sobs, but they had nothing to do with her anymore. Stepping out of the police station, Sarah took a deep, almost convulsive breath. The air was frosty and clean. It burned her lungs, bringing her back to her senses. She stood on the steps, watching people hurry about their business, and for the first time in days, she felt the nightmare beginning to recede. "Are you okay?" Her attorney, Peter Andrews, had stopped beside her. "Yes." She nodded. "I think so. They broke," he stated, lighting a cigarette. "That husband of yours is a weakling. He'll keep throwing his mother under the bus to save himself, and she, in turn, will do the same to him. A classic case. What happens now? Now the investigation will move quickly. A confession from one of the parties, backed by an audio recording and witness testimony, is practically a closed case. I think it will be handed over to the DA's office soon." They were silent for a moment. "You need to think about a civil suit," Peter continued. "The divorce, division of assets, and terminating his parental rights. The division of assets is simple," Sarah said with a bitter smile. "There's nothing to divide. The condo is mine, so is the car. As for his parental rights, I don't know. He's still Leo's father. A father who allowed his own mother to nearly kill his son?" The lawyer looked at her with surprise. "Sarah, don't be naive. This man is a danger if not physically, then morally. He's weak, easily led, and as long as his mother is in the picture, he will always be a threat to you and your son." The lawyer's words were harsh, but fair. Sarah knew he was right. "I'll think about it," she said. She went to the hospital. Leo was feeling much better. He had already been moved from intensive care to a regular pediatric ward. "Mommy!" He threw his arms around her neck when she walked in. "When are we going home? I'm bored here." "Soon, my love." Sarah hugged him tight. "The doctor said just a few more days and we'll be discharged." She spent the whole day with him. They read, drew, and watched cartoons on the tablet Megan had brought. Sarah looked at her cheerful, almost healthy son and thanked her lucky stars that everything had turned out okay. That evening, when she returned to Megan's apartment, another surprise awaited her. Her parents were standing at the door. "Mom! Dad!" She rushed into their arms. "Oh, sweetie," her mother cried. "We know everything," Megan called. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" "I didn't want to worry you." "Didn't want to worry us?" her father exclaimed. "My daughter is being locked in a room, my grandson is being harmed, and she didn't want to worry us." They went into the kitchen. Her parents had brought a whole bag of homemade food. Her mother immediately started bustling around the stove. "I am not leaving you alone in this city anymore," her father said firmly, sitting at the table. "Pack your things. You're coming to live with us." "But Dad, I have my job. Leo has his daycare. You'll find a new job." He cut her off. "And we'll find a daycare. The important thing is that you'll be safe with us." Sarah didn't know what to say. On one hand, she knew her parents were right. She didn't want to go back to her apartment, where everything reminded her of what had happened. On the other hand, she didn't want to become dependent again, living under her parents' wing. "Give me some time," she requested. "I need to finish things here, the divorce, the court case. And then I'll decide." The trial of Derek and Dolores Henderson took place 2 months later. It was a quick, almost formal proceeding. Derek, who had fully admitted his guilt and cooperated with the investigation, received 1 year of probation. Dolores, who denied her involvement to the end and tried to portray herself as a victim, received 2 years of probation for child endangerment and reckless harm. Additionally, the court ordered them to pay Sarah $10,000 in damages for emotional distress. For Sarah, it was a victory not about the money, of course, but about the fact that justice had prevailed. Immediately after the trial, she filed for divorce. Derek did not contest it. He didn't even show up for the hearing. They were divorced by default. She decided to postpone the issue of terminating his parental rights for now. Her lawyer advised her to wait and see how he behaved. Leo was discharged from the hospital 2 weeks after the incident. The doctors said they were lucky. Complications had been avoided, but they advised her to take it easy with the child and focus on strengthening his immune system. Sarah took an unpaid leave of absence from work and, as her parents had insisted, moved with her son back to her small hometown on the shores of Lake Erie. There, in the peace and quiet, surrounded by love and care, she gradually began to heal. She took long walks with Leo along the beach, breathed the fresh air, and read books. She was learning to live again, to live without fear, without guilt, without constant tension. Derek didn't call. He dutifully paid child support, a small amount from his new salary. He had gotten a job as a security guard at a supermarket, but he made no attempt to contact her or his son. Sarah didn't know whether to be happy about it or not. Half a year passed. Sarah grew stronger, rested. She realized she couldn't sit idle any longer. She found a job in her town, working at the central pharmacy. The salary was less than in Cleveland, but it was enough to live on. Leo was enrolled in a good preschool. Life was settling into a new, calm rhythm. One day, returning from work, she saw a familiar figure by the gate of her parents' house. It was Derek. He stood there, shifting from foot to foot, looking pathetic, thinner, haggard, in an old worn-out jacket. "Hi," he said when she approached. "What are you doing here?" Sarah asked. Not with hostility, but more with surprise. "I came to see my son." He hesitated. "And to talk to you." They went into the yard and sat on a bench. "How are you?" he asked, not daring to look at her. "We're good." Sarah looked at him and felt nothing but a slight pity. "Leo is healthy. He's in preschool. I'm working." "I know." He nodded. I was wrong, Sarah. So wrong." He spoke for a long time, haltingly, telling her about his life now. After the trial, his mother had completely disowned him, blaming him for the betrayal and kicking him out of her apartment. He had been couch surfing with friends, then rented a room in a run-down house. He worked as a security guard, then as a stalker. He tried to find something better, but with a criminal record and no experience, it was difficult. "I lost everything," he said at the end. "My family, my home, my self-respect, all because of my own stupidity and weakness." Sarah was silent. "I'm not asking for forgiveness." He finally looked up at her. His eyes were filled with tears. "I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted to see Leo." At that moment, Leo ran out of the house. "Mom, look what I drew!" He froze when he saw the strange man. "Leo," Sarah said quietly, "come here. This is your dad." The boy looked at Derek with curiosity, then back at his mother. Derek slowly knelt in front of him. "Hi, buddy," he said in a shaky voice. Leo took a step toward him, then another. He reached out a small hand and touched his unshaven cheek. "Dad?" he asked, uncertainly. Derek nodded, unable to speak, and then Leo hugged him, a simple, childish hug around the neck. Derek burst into tears, sobbing loudly. Like a child, Sarah watched them, her heart constricting with complex, contradictory emotions. She knew the past couldn't be changed, but maybe they still had a chance at some kind of future, not as husband and wife, but as parents to the most beloved boy in the world. Derek stayed in town for 3 days. He stayed in a cheap motel on the outskirts but spent all his time with Leo. They walked, played, and went down to the lake. Sarah watched them from a distance and saw her son's heart thawing. He was drawn to the father he barely remembered, and Derek responded with such genuine, hard-won tenderness that Sarah's chest ached. They hardly spoke to each other alone. All their communication was limited to short phrases concerning Leo. But in his gaze, she read a silent plea. Before he left, he approached her. "Sarah, can I come visit?" he asked. "Even just once a month. I want to be a father to him." "You can," she nodded. "He's your son." Derek left, and he did start coming back. On the last Saturday of every month, he would take the overnight bus to spend 2 weekend days with his son. He always brought modest gifts. A toy car, a book, a chocolate bar. He played with Leo, read to him, and taught him how to build things out of wood. Sarah saw her ex-husband changing. He was no longer that infantile, perpetually whining creative genius. He was just a man trying to correct the mistakes of his past. He found a new, better job on a construction crew. The work was hard and physical, but he didn't complain. You know, he told Sarah once, "For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm doing something real with my own hands, and it's a good feeling." She saw his calloused, rough hands and knew he was telling the truth. A year went by. Leo eagerly awaited his father's visits. They had become true friends. One day, Derek arrived, but he wasn't alone. With him was a woman, short, modestly dressed, with kind, slightly timid eyes. "Sarah, meet Katie," he said, when they were alone. We work together." Sarah said hello, trying to hide her surprise. "She's a good person," Derek said when Katie went into the yard with Leo. "Simple, dependable. She knows about everything, and she didn't judge me." "I'm happy for you, Derek," Sarah said sincerely. And it was true. She was genuinely glad he wasn't alone. They married 6 months later. Sarah attended their small wedding. She watched her ex-husband, who looked at his new wife with such love and tenderness, and thought about how strangely life shuffles the deck. Dolores did not appear at her son's wedding. She could never forgive him for his betrayal. She lived alone in her apartment, communicating with almost no one. Derek tried to mend their relationship, but she refused to engage. Sarah sometimes thought of her without anger, more with a sense of pity. This woman had destroyed her own life by pushing away the only person who loved her. Her own life wasn't standing still either. She worked, raised her son, met with friends. She was calm and self-sufficient. She was no longer looking for love, not waiting for a prince. She was just living. And then, he appeared in her life. His name was Alex. He was a doctor, a pediatrician, to whom she had once brought Leo for a checkup. Smart, cultured, with a wonderful sense of humor and very kind eyes. He hit it off with Leo right away, and then he asked Sarah out for coffee. She hesitated for a long time, but eventually went, and she didn't regret it. Their relationship developed slowly, cautiously. Both had been burned by past marriages, both were afraid of making another mistake, but they were drawn to each other. A year later, they began living together. Alex turned out to be exactly the man she had always dreamed of. Reliable, caring, understanding. He loved Leo like his own son, and Leo loved him back. Sometimes on weekends, they would all get together. Sarah, Alex, Leo, Derek, and Katie. They would go to the park, have a barbecue. They were strange, but very warm gatherings. Ex-spouses who had managed to forgive each other and build new, happy families. One day, sitting by the fire, Sarah caught Katie's eye. "You're very strong," she said quietly. "Why do you say that? I couldn't have done it." Katie shook her head. "Forgive and let go." Sarah smiled. "Sometimes, to be happy, you first have to learn to forgive. Not for others, but for yourself." She looked at her men, her beloved husband Alex, who was playing with her son, and her ex-husband Derek, who was tenderly embracing his wife, and she realized she was completely and utterly happy. Her path to this happiness had been long and thorny, but she had walked it, and now she knew for certain, even after the darkest night, the dawn always comes. The most important thing is to never give up and to believe in yourself and in people. If this story, about how true happiness can rise from the ashes of betrayal, resonated with your soul, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share in the comments. Do you believe that the hardest trials make us stronger? Your opinion is very important, as it inspires the creation of new, even deeper, and more lifelike stories.